Don't do it. That is the one thing, if I could say anything, to anyone in power in the United States government today. Don't do it. Don't go sanctioning China. It's not going to end well for us. Maybe you're rich enough to where you'll be fine no matter what happens, even in like the apocalypse. You know, you've got your bunker reserved in New Zealand or something like that. But if you have any ounce of concern for anyone in this country other than yourself, don't do it. Yes, I know all they're doing right now is they are sanctioning individual members of the Chinese Communist Party and saying, we won't give you visas into the United States. And it's very easy for people to go, hey, why do you want Chi-Coms coming to America so bad? What are you, some Chi-Com lover? What do you care if Chi-Coms can't come here? It's not that I like these people who are in the Chinese Communist Party. It's not that I like the Chinese Communist Party at all. In fact, I hate them. I hate communism, okay? I think that's pretty well established on this channel, that I'm not a fan of communism. But I understand that the United States, our economy, is pretty much entirely dependent on China. Yes, there's some things that aren't made in China. You can buy a made-in-USA screwdriver if you want. But other than a screwdriver, you know, other than something that can be made entirely in the United States and is like one piece, everything, even things that are stamped made in USA, are filled to the brim with components made in China. And no, sanctioning a few Chi-Com politicians, or politicians is even the right word, party apparatchiks, over Uyghurs or something, and saying, oh, well, you can't have visas to get into the U.S. No, that's not impeding trade. No, that's not going to affect our standards of living. But this is how it starts every single time. This is how sanctions on Russia started. This is how sanctions on Venezuela started. This is how sanctions on Iran started. And frankly, I don't want to see this happen again. We don't need to be escalating things with China. We're in too weak of a position, you know? I mean, if we could, not that I think sanctions are ever a good idea. I think they're dumb. They just don't work, even if you, like, agree with the goals of the sanctions. They never achieve their goals. So they're stupid, and they make you look impotent. I've been using that word a lot lately to describe the U.S. government. I wish that I didn't have to, although, well, I mean, I am an anarchist, so I do want governments to be impotent. But I want them to be impotent in the sense that they are unable to exert their will over their own people. Impotent in foreign policy often is going to lead to negative consequences for that government's, you know, subject population. Going down this road of sanctioning China is like driving down a road that says bridge out in 5 miles. Okay? That road's not going to take you anywhere good. You can say, well, I can turn around at any time I want. But if this road doesn't go anywhere, if it only goes to a bridge that's out, you're just driving towards a cliff. There's no purpose there. Just turn around right now. In fact, don't make a right turn onto that road at all. Because at best, you will have accomplished nothing. You see that? That's the best case scenario of sanctioning China, is that it does nothing. If it does anything at all, it's going to hurt us. And you could say, well, maybe it's going to hurt some Chinese people's feelings. I don't care about their feelings. I care about my standard of living. I care about, you know, the standard of living of people around me who I know. I've met a couple of Chinese people in my life. I have no ill will towards them. But generally speaking, what happens to Chinese people has no bearing on my life. What does affect me is the goods that Chinese people produce. Goods which, you know, I need. And basic stuff. I'm not just talking about cheap plastic toys. I'm not just talking about, you know, our consumer culture here in the U.S. and the need of people to constantly buy things. I'm not a fan of that. I reuse as many things as I can. Everything I have is old. I don't buy anything new. But nevertheless, there are new things that need to be bought and produced every day. There are parts that you need. It's something that people don't understand. Even if you have old stuff that's made in America, you go and try and buy a new part for it. Let's say you've got an old-timey, Briggs & Stratton go-kart from the 70s. Okay? It's all American stuff. You know, it's a welded steel tubes. It's got these wheels that were made in America. It's got, of course, an American-made Briggs & Stratton flathead engine. And you put some ethanol in that and forget to drain the carb over the summer. It's all gummed up and nasty. Let's say you can clean it all, but all the seals are destroyed. You order a carb kit. Where's that carb kit coming from? Is it coming from, like, Wisconsin? Is it coming from Michigan? No, it's coming from China. You need a set of tires for your boat trailer. They're coming from China. You drive an old made in USA car, that's 40 or 50 years old, and the seats are all ripped up. You buy seat covers. Guess what? They're made in China. Every little thing you could possibly imagine is made in whole or in part in China. At the very least, in part. Like I said, the only thing you can get that's 100% made in USA basically is a screwdriver. Or maybe some furniture. You have really expensive, like, custom hardwood furniture. It's made by, like, Amish people in Ohio. Or like a carpenter. You know, you hire somebody that looks like Jesus and say, hey, can you build me a dresser? He can go and source wood from the local lumber yard, and it's probably all going to be made in America stuff, except for maybe the nails or the screws. Maybe those are made in China. But it's clear. Our government is moving towards trying to sanction China as if we could have a negative impact on China's economy. And we might, yeah, I mean, there's something. But it's not like I said, if we have a split between the U.S. and China, it's because of either whether it's China derangement syndrome or Russia derangement syndrome or Trump derangement syndrome. Actually, that last one doesn't make sense because, Trump was a big anti-China guy. So it's not like they'd be going against China to own Trump. But, in the past when I've been talking about this, it's been like theoretical. It's been, the U.S. is just trying to push China around. What's that smart? What would they do? Sanction them? It was like a ridiculous thing that I would throw out there. But now it's happened. It's reality. China is being sanctioned. It's sanctioned in a small way. But like I said, this is what happens every single time. They start small, and then before you know it, the Iranians are having to smuggle their own oil out of their country. And the thing is, China, they don't need the United States. We need all their stuff. They don't need our green pieces of paper, especially not if the U.S. is going to go seizing assets of foreign governments over political disputes like they have with Russia. At that point, the U.S. dollar becomes a liability and not an asset. And so why would the Chinese care? Oh, well, all the Chinese get out of our relationship are dollars. And so the U.S. is making dollars, much less desirable to hold if you are, a borderline rogue nation like China. If I were a Chinese person, I'd be looking at this and I'd say, go ahead, America, sanction me. Because then we'll just have all that stuff to ourselves. And China makes a lot of great stuff these days. China's catching up to where Japan was like in the 80s. They're maybe not quite there yet, but they're getting they're pretty far up there. I've seen Chinese knockoffs of, Japanese stuff like dirt bikes and four-wheelers. Like there's this, in China, they make an exact copy of a Yamaha Raptor. And it's pretty darn close. I'm not familiar with Chinese cars, because obviously they're not bringing any over to the United States, but I'd imagine that they're probably pretty good compared to like a Toyota. And that's because China is innocent. Their economy has been developing. It's undeniable. I mean, even in my lifetime, the kinds of things that are able to be manufactured in China and the quality of manufacture coming out of China has increased substantially. It used to be that in order to have really good quality items, it had to say that it was made in some kind of Western affiliated country, whether that be made in USA, made in Germany, or made in Japan, or even made in Italy for certain items. But nowadays, you can get a lot of the best quality stuff that's made in China. And so if you're Russia, for example, they're pretty much being shut out of the Western markets. And the EU, the United States, They think that this is a big blow to Russia. Russia now can't have stuff that's made in Germany. Whatever will they do? Well, they'll be able to get near on par quality knockoffs for less money from China. I think I said this before, but it's really starting to sink into me. I heard today on the radio, somebody said, I didn't have time to fact check this. At this point, 1 in 10 nations across the world are under U.S. sanctions. What does it mean to be sanctioned by the United States? When you're sanctioned by the United States, I mean, it varies. You can have little things like what's happened to China just now, which is always the first step. Oh, we're just going to sanction some high-level political leaders and say that they can't have visas to enter the United States. Okay, there's that. But at the fullest extent, like where you are with Russia is, it's America saying, you know what, you can't play in our sandbox anymore. And that can be really sad if you're the only one. If you get kicked out of the sandbox and everybody else is playing and having fun in the sandbox, and you're the only one who's not in it. But eventually, you get to a point where 1/10 of the world is kicked out of the sandbox. Guess what? They can build their own sandbox. They don't need the United States. They can have fun all on their own. And then, it's America who can look on and realize everyone else is over there having fun, and I'm all by myself. And obviously we're not there yet, but these things take time, and we're rapidly moving in that direction. This isn't like the Cold War. When there was a clear bipolar split in the world, there were two blocks. You had the First World, the Second World, and the Third World, which was kind of up for grabs. The First World being the West, the Second World being the East, and then the Third World being everybody else. The First World had all the manufacturing, it had all the great industry, it had all the great mines, although, I mean, there were some great mines in the East, but arguably they were not able to be put to as good a use. There was a major brain drain after World War II, where, a lot of smart people who wanted to have a future fled to the West. And so we had a lot better stuff in the West. We had a lot more... what's the term? Surplus. We had wealth. We produced things. We had stuff to do. We had fun. And in the East, people were struggling just to earn their daily bread. People waited in bread lines. They were still back at the point that they hadn't even figured bread out yet. And that's how backwards the East was. But it's not the case anymore. The Great Leap Forward is over, thankfully. China is no longer, killing millions of people in the name of industrialization. They now are an industrial power. Russia is in a much better place than it was back then. The modern Russian economy is much freer than under the Soviet Union. They have their energy. India is up and coming. They're making a lot of good moves. They're moving in the right direction. And so if the world is cleaved in half, roughly, between the West and the East, it's not going to be the same balance now. It's not that we're going to be, it's not that their side is going to be the ones who are suffering so much because they don't have anything. They can get by. These are not the same countries. This is not global communism. And we in the West are not the same West that we were back then. We are a rusting West. We don't produce what we used to. The quality of what we produce, frankly, is not what it used to be. I deal with made in America parts. They're oftentimes not superior to Chinese-made equivalents. There's a lot of cost cutting that has to be done in order to even produce things in the West because it is so expensive, because of regulations and labor costs and all these other things. And so we here have to cut corners to produce something at all. I mean, environmentalism is not the entire culprit, but it's the main culprit. Because the green fiction, which I rail against constantly, is a luxury. It's a luxury of something you only have. It's something you only have the luxury of considering in a country that just sits around and consumes and eats all day, that doesn't have to produce anything. The West has been able to worry about all this environmentalism stuff and basically outlaw industry and production and progress and, you know, humanity, because we've been able to outsource all of that to the East. They're able to get their fuel from Russia and get their goods from China. And then at home, we can sit around and do nothing and say, you know what? Why don't we plant some more trees? And I'm someone who's all for planting trees. I love planting trees. But then you also have this stupid environmental crap like, you know, emissions regulations, which do absolutely nothing. All they do is drive up costs, and then you have all this stuff about, oh, well, you have to be careful what you spill on the earth, and, you know, you can't use certain chemicals, and blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, people just throw up their hands and say, you know what, fine. I'm not going to make anything here. It's too difficult. Our tractors don't work because, you know, we're out of friggin' urea. You have to put piss in your tractor to make it work, to grow your food. And if you run out of piss, then no food. Oh, and if your tractor breaks down, you're not allowed to work on it yourself because that's hacking. And so you got to take it to the dealership, which might be 200 miles away, and you're going to have to pay somebody to haul it there. And so we're getting to the point where food production doesn't even make sense to do in America, of course, without extreme subsidies. And so it's sad. We're becoming the backward bloc. We're the ones who are going to try and isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. Remember, after World War II, it was the East that was building the wall. They're the ones who walled themselves off from the West. They were afraid of the West's ideas getting into their country. They were afraid of Western propaganda. They were afraid of Western culture. And you could say, you know, maybe to a certain extent they're afraid of Western culture now because it's so insane and all that. But I think that they're much more confident in themselves. I think that they feel superior to Western culture. I think they laugh at how stupid Western culture is. I don't think they want to hide it like they did back then, back when Western culture was strong and much healthier. They didn't want their citizens to see what life in the West was like. They wanted them to imagine that it was much worse, than it is. You know, the old stories about, you know, when Soviets would ask, you know, hey, why do they have so much food on the shelves in their grocery stores? You know, and the Russians would tell their people, oh, that's because nobody has any money to buy the food. That's why it just sits there and it spoils, because nobody can afford food. Rather than, you know, the obvious thing being, oh, well, there's just that much abundance in the West that we can, you know, keep our grocery shelves stocked. So, I think that's about all I have to say on this. It's concerning, extremely. I will probably go into more detail about why this is so bad in the future, but I think I've made my point for today. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.